And what I ask to look at the regulatory harmonization. We have several regulatory bodies internationally, and the idea is to try and get them harmonized as much as possible. We have prominent bodies like the EMEA and the FDA and the Japanese and the Australian bodies, and the idea is to get them together to get internationally recognized standards on quality, safety, and efficacy. Everybody agrees today that every drug that is available, wherever it is available in the whole world, internationally, should have proven quality, safety, and it should also be effective. This is the global approach to the treatment of medicines is to treat medicines with dignity. Is not to treat medicines as ordinary items of commerce, but to treat medicines with the dignity that they deserve. In that way, we could say, and we would leave as an inheritance to those who come after us, that medicines belong to everybody. So medicines belong to the whole of mankind. Now, to get the idea, it's not enough to have medicines available, but there has to be access to medicines by all human beings. And in that way, if we could increase the access to medicines, but we have to increase the access to medicines that have proven quality, safety, and efficacy. Now, but to get this harmonization, common technical documents started to be devised. But we have to realize that it is not enough to put the law, that we have to have the following standards, but in order to have a real international agreement on this, we have to have competences. We have to build the competence, and we have to build the trust. For this reason, we cannot consider medicines from a political point of view, but we have to consider medicines from a scientific point of view. This scientific approach would require building competence, building trust, and also important is to build communication and collaboration. So rather than taking the approach of putting international laws of how these documents could be stated, one has to put into action communication and collaboration. And therefore, changing the drug approach to unity through collaboration rather through imposition through international laws. And that is the trend that one is going into. So what the importance of this, of having a harmonized system is, because then it would be what can be done, one step forward that can be done to increase the access to new medicines while ensuring that this access does not jeopardize the quality, the safety, or the efficacy of the medicines that are made available. Now, if we want to increase the, one way how to increase the access is if we reduce duplication. In other words, that in order, we don't need to test the drug in the United States, and then we test it in Europe, and then we test it in Japan, and then test it again in Australia, then test it in the Middle East, and then test it in several other countries. Rather, if there is the trust needed to do this, then one could reduce the duplication, then you increase the access. Then you reduce the regulatory sciences expenses. In order to ensure safety, efficacy, and availability of drugs, we don't need to increase the expenses, or rather the expenses in doing this should be decreased as much as possible, and this could be achieved through harmonization. harmonization cannot occur unless there is collaboration between the different bodies in the different countries. And one way how to collaborate is by sharing resources. So if you start sharing resources, we will increase the collaboration, we will decrease the regulatory sciences expenses because we have reduced the duplication, and therefore we increase the access to medicines. Now, the benefits from regulatory harmonization is that if we can start with simple things in harmonization. If we start with things like having the same format of the documentation, the same format in an international way, then we could come to the next point, where we'll have the content then, which would be similar. In that way, one would have improved the capacity of the regulators. And if you increase the capacity of the regulators, then you can get the registration of drugs, the availability of drugs into the international market much quicker. So, why regulating drugs? Why did we start with this regulation? Why do we have to regulate drugs? Why all this expense into regulation, into having to put drugs into the market after going through a cumbersome way to register these drugs? This started in the 1930s, when there was hardly any regulation. Everybody prepared the drug as he wanted, and then you could sell it anywhere in the world. There was a tragic mistake where they prepared an elixir of a new antibacterial, sulfonamide. Everybody was happy that finally one was having an antibacterial available, and that antibacterial, they put a preservative. They did not know that that was toxic. There were no tests on it, and the number of children, the elixir was used mostly by children, and a significant number of children actually died. Because of that, then they started to put regulation in the United States. In Europe, we have the well-known thalidomide tragedy, where a number of pregnant women took a drug which was used mostly as a sedating drug, and the drug caused a lot of teratogenic effects in several patients. And that led to saying that we have to do something about this so that these tragedies, as far as possible, do not repeat themselves, and that started the regulation. So the quality of medicines was established first through the development of pharmacopoeias. So the first step in the regulation was to try and put quality to ensure safety. And one started with the pharmacopoeias. The pharmacopoeia harmonized the specifications for different substances. The monographs did not remain anymore secret. Up to that time, the testing and the preparation of the various medicines was a very top trade secret. And the monographs then had to become open to all, and they become in the form of a pharmacopoeia. These had also, the pharmacopoeia had specifications which were validated. That is, the analytical methods became validated. That is, they were carried out and they were proven to show what is required to be shown. Then the next step in the division of pharmacopoeias was to have reference standards, because it's useless to try to carry out an analytical method unless you have the same reference standard in the same places. So the pharmacopoeias commissions started having their own reference standards. So we had in 1820, we had the United States Pharmacopoeia, 64 followed the British Pharmacopoeia, then we had the Japanese Pharmacopoeia, and then the International Pharmacopoeia in 1951. But what we could say is that we did not succeed to say, let's have one pharmacopoeia only internationally. And in that way, we know that the drugs have been tested all to a common heritage, to a common standard. We have not yet arrived at that stage, but that is one way where one could move in having one international pharmacopoeia, and then that pharmacopoeia could have appendices that appertain maybe to different regions. Could be because of temperature, could be because of customs, could be because of other reasons, but then those would be appendices for the particular region. So there were several efforts to try and get united and have science as one science in the whole world. Some of them were more successful than others. Probably the most successful attempt to get an internationally agreed upon documents and internationally agreed upon methods how to ensure the safety and the efficacy and the quality of medicines was the International Conference on Harmonization. In fact, this was so successful that we still call the documentation that comes out of this organization as ICH, coming from the International Conference on Harmonization. This met in April 1990, and what they did is that they got the technical requirements for pharmaceuticals for human use. And the attempt was more or less successful because the regulators got in together with the industry and they said, let's prepare drugs which are of similar standards for the whole purpose, both to be used by the industry and to be used by the regulators in registering drugs, new drugs. And there was a steering committee with a group of major countries, mainly Europe, the United States and Japan, and they joined with other organizations like WHO, the European Union, the Japan Pharmaceutical Manufacturers, FDA from the United States, and together they started writing standards. And today they have arrived at the stage where they want now these standards to go out of this group to other countries, to other regions. And that is where the state we are. Some are afraid that if you expand this too much, too great, then there will be a problem. There will be a problem that it will be very difficult to reach agreement. The more people there are, the more opinions there are, and the more the difficulty to reach an agreement. So, but on the other hand, if you don't include all the regions, you will never reach an international standard because it would be an imposition. But rather than having that, there is now a big movement to try and go again into collaboration. And so recently, very recently, the aim of the ICH is more to try and see how many more collaborators they can find from different regions. The objectives of this harmonization is to improve the efficiency of new drug development and to quicken the registration process. It has become very expensive from the time that a new drug is discovered until the time that it is available in the market. Even in small markets, imagine until the time that the drug is made available to all human beings who need the drug. How many more years are taken from the development of a new drug until it reaches each and everybody who needs it. And to try and improve this is to try and improve this efficiency is to try to have a harmonized way. As we said in the beginning, to decrease the duplication. In that way you decrease the cost, and in that way you increase the access to the drug through harmonized guidelines and standards. So in these guidelines we find that we have the quality by having guidelines how to test for stability, guidelines how to test for impurities, and the GMP guidelines how to manufacture the drug. Then there is the safety which one has introduced to ensure how one would lessen the chances of carcinogenicity, that is of the drug that is used for whatever disease, that it is not carcinogenic, and that is an important feature. That is its effect on that it does not have teratogenic effects, and then the efficacy through clinical trials, through getting harmonized clinical trials, and clinical trials that are recognized by each and every country, so that you don't need to repeat the clinical trials in different countries. Instead, the money and the energy is spent on getting other benefits to the client. The last bit is that they are trying to get it multidisciplinary. That is, in, for example, getting definitions. To get the definitions, although not everybody would understand the same for the same word in English, and therefore one had to define it, even though it is in the same language. It has to be defined because one word could be given different interpretation. For example, what do we mean by safety? What is safety? And that had to be defined. Then there was a common technical document. This was probably the most successful thing, and now one is moving to electronic standards, so that the standards will be available, will be disseminated much more quicker, much more easier, by everybody using the same electronic template in submitting the documents for approval by the regulatory bodies in the different countries. For example, to give you an idea about, there are 80 guidelines at the moment available. For efficacy, there are 9 topics. For safety, there are another 9 topics and another 10 topics for quality. For example, in quality, there are guidelines to determine how stability testing of new drug products could be carried out. You have multidisciplinary guidelines, which is a dictionary, more or less, and then you have the electronic standards, you have the guidelines for non-clinical safety studies, the common technical document, which is probably the most commonly used now document in submitting dossiers for approvals by the various authorities, and then there are again a number of ways how to put in directions, guidelines, how to put in all the necessary data. This is done through a pyramid. We say we have the first module that is left up to the different countries to carry out that particular module. Then the second module is, and the third the second and the third and fourth and fifth modules are the CTD, are common to all the countries. One has to get now, it is no longer is there any one country that is producing one particular drug. In fact, if you look at the active pharmaceutical ingredients used in Europe, for example, 80% of them are not manufactured in Europe, they are imported. So the time must be gone where one thinks that one is going to do everything in one particular country. Every country is now dependent on the other. Because of this, the need for harmonization has greatly increased. For example, Now, one is going into joint active pharmaceutical ingredients inspections in the different countries. And one idea is now that they got even an ICH, it's called ICH Q7, so that the inspections are done in a similar way. It's a difference between, not in an identical way, but in a similar way. If we go with this harmonization, everybody will benefit from it, because the manufacturers will not have an inspector from FDA saying one thing, and then an inspector from Europe saying another thing, and then an inspector from Japan wants another thing. If you have that harmonization, then one would know what to expect, what standards one needs to reach for the particular inspection. And these inspections are now increasing, although about, for example, 50% of them are carried out. If you look at India and China, 50% of the inspections carried out by FDA and by the European authorities, by EMEA, are carried out in India and China. This gives you an idea of the amount of inspections carried out by the European authorities in the different countries, and you see that most of them are carried out in India. For example, where I come from, in Malta, we carry out a number of, started carrying out a number of GMP third country inspections, which to grant an EU GMP, and we have, for example, this year carried out 11 third country inspections in India and in Serbia. If you carry out joint inspections, the advantage of joint inspections is that one is sharing the ideas, and so rather than doing one inspection in one country on its own, you will have inspectors from different countries. That will increase the trust and the sharing of ideas of how things are done. Now, there is a database where one would put the data of the inspections, so that one could, and the results of the inspections, so that one could refer to what happened by each regulatory authority, would know what any authority has done. This will probably improve a lot drug development, because one would know what to expect then from the particular inspections. The importance of harmonization is increasing enormously through the introduction of the biopharma. And the biopharma, if you look at the total revenue of a number of companies, for example, Sanofi Aventis has 53% of its revenue from biopharma. Hoffmann La Roche has 79% of its revenue from biopharma. So, if you this shows that the importance of harmonization, although it is more difficult for biopharma, it's much more important, because the biopharma requires much more regulation, requires much more safety considerations and much more efficacy considerations. The evolution of the biotechnology, as we have said, is like proteins, for example, vaccines and other biological drugs, is increasing every day, and one has to get into these quality characteristics to infuse biological activity. Because up to a short time, we were happy to satisfy bioequivalence studies, and therefore we were harmonizing bioequivalence studies. But now we have to move in another stairs, because now we don't have solely bioequivalence, but we have biosimilarity now. And biosimilarity differs much more than bioequivalence, and therefore the harmonization of biosimilarity is much more important and significant to go through it. That gives you some idea about the amount of biosimilars, that we are going to see a lot of patent expiration, and therefore in the coming years we are going to see a large amount of increase in biosimilars, which have to be harmonized, and where you get a much more difficult to get it accepted unless we have harmonization between the different countries. You will get more difficulty to get harmonization of biosimilars because it's a more difficult scientific aspect unless one unites together and have the same standards than it would have been for example, the harmonization of equivalence in generic products. Biosimilars are not generics, as everybody knows. They are similar, but not the same. So one has to establish now not bioequivalence by biosimilarity. But still we need to have, because they are biosimilars, we still need to have the safety that is required as we could substitute generics for the originators. We'll have to be in the same position that we can safely and get the acceptance of the users and of the prescribers that these are interchangeable and substitution. So we will have to get the willingness of the physicians, the payers, the patients to adopt biosimilars if we want to increase medicine access to all human beings. So we have to share information, we have to increase the efficiency, we have to decrease the cost, we have to decrease the variability, we have to communicate on biosimilars if we want to get biosimilars accessible to patients. And finally, to conclude, because the time I have overcome the time that was allocated to me, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, we have to go together and work together towards harmonization. Thank you very much.